Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to our coffee break on the most recent technology study we performed. You'll notice the title on the last page is a little tongue-in-cheek, but technology nirvana is something that many of our clients would like to achieve. This coffee break is part of our ongoing series to educate our Treasury network on key issues. Treasury Strategies, the Division of Novantas, is dedicated to thought leadership as part of our ongoing support of Treasury and banking. In addition to advising corporate Treasury as part of our 360-degree view of Treasury, we're now a FinTech 100 company and actually have a rather unique Treasury product called NDepth, which does what I'm calling outsourced bank fee analysis. I'm Jeff DiOrio, and I'm joined today by Colin McAlpine from our technology consulting practice.
Good morning, everyone.
A couple of items to cover before we start. This webinar will take 20 minutes. The formal study is available to whoever wants it. We'll be presenting findings at the AFP. So if you're going to the AFP, see us at booth 353. We will be happy to discuss the survey and our findings in more detail. And all participants who are on the call will receive a copy of the presentation and a link to the recording. Next slide, please, Joe.
So Jeff, we just finished a study on the Treasury use of technology. What prompted you to do the study?
The study is something we've been thinking of for a while. It really came to a head when I had a conversation at the National Association of Corporate Treasurers this year, when a treasurer discussed how his peers seemed to be frustrated with the realized value they got from their technology spend. He described it, he said, look, we're looking at the ROA of our automation, or should we say the ROTI, return on technology investment.
So what was the key focus of the study?
So primarily it was to understand how companies can realize the full value of their automation. And I'll get into what that means shortly, but what is automation supposed to achieve for you? It enhances your efficiencies so you can do more strategic work and not need to add to the resources as your organizational remit expands. So as they're asking you to do more, hopefully the automation is taking care of all of the tactical work you were doing. Improved control. Improved controls are super, super important these days. Payment fraud is something that all Treasury and accounts payable departments are focused on. It's a C-level issue. It's one example of improved control, but it's super important. And then finally, to add new capabilities. So in efficiencies, control, and new capabilities are the keys. The utilization pyramid that's listed here highlight the concerns we've heard. Hopefully through the process of automation, you've minimized data collection and tactical activities and freed your resources up to do strategic activities. And what we're hearing is people aren't achieving this goal. They're putting the technology in place. One treasurer said, we deployed all this technology, my people seem to be doing just as much work and we achieved the same result. So where's the value? And what's exciting about the survey is we were surprised by some of the responses and some of the findings, so we hope you'll also find them interesting. Next slide, please, Joe.
Yeah, so that is interesting. So can you share with us, Jeff, what you actually learned about the levels of satisfaction from the study?
Right, so we did a quantitative and a qualitative portions of the study. We had a web survey that gave us a lot of data, but we also interviewed people, and we'll be talking about the interview responses as well. Quantitatively, the general level of satisfaction was just over 3 on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 was very satisfied and 1 was not satisfied at all. So most people that responded said they had achieved a nominal return. One of the positives that you want to take from this is around 20% in each of the categories you see, for each of those areas, about 20% of respondents felt they had achieved full value, that they were getting everything they had wanted from the technology. And that's exciting. So there were differences between some services and solutions having a slightly higher level of realized satisfaction and realized utility. So one thing to think of is not just how to get higher utilization out of these individual technologies, but also how to get them all to work well together. Because I think the the concept of straight-through processing was also brought up as a key area where organizations were realizing the value of their technology.
Okay. So what thoughts do we have? How are organizations determining where their technology isn't working optimally?
That's sort of the beginning of this process. So one way firms are incorporating to review it is to look at the daily workflow, look at the tasks and required outputs that your group have to perform, right? Have to deliver. Look at what your delivery requirements are. Then look at what systems are being used for. And then one of the keys we look at is how much Excel is being used and how much manual data manipulation is required. And if you look at those areas where you're using Excel, where people are taking data from one system and putting it in another, or where things are having to be massaged, that's an area where you want to look to see if you can enhance your automation. So if you do take an objective look at it, somebody said to me yesterday, a hard look in the mirror, you will find it's not hard to determine areas where there's breaks in your automation or processes that are less than efficient. And that's what you want to focus on. Next slide, please, Joe.
So what did the participants in the study indicate were the areas where they were dissatisfied? Or to say it another way, for the areas where they felt more could be done, what were the reasons they had for that?
The top 3 items: functionality not fully leveraged, reporting, and missing capabilities. Those 3 areas, when we look at them, we say they can be addressed by reconfiguration or potentially a bolt-on like a dashboarding technology. That's really hot these days. We're going to explore approaches to addressing all of these. Right? The first items we hear, the very first item, that one, available functionality not fully utilized, is something we hear all the time from our clients. They say we wanted to get to phase 2, but we ran out of time or we ran out of money, and we also ran out of energy. Team burnout is something to be considered when you're implementing, finishing a big project. Certainly congratulating everybody and buying them dinner is something that you should do, and hand out awards for achieving something, because nobody has extra time in the day. So deploying a significant technology project can be a draining of energy of your team. An interesting thing to note here is that vendor support and upgrades are not at the top of the list. We hear them as a common refrain regularly, and it was interesting to see where they landed. Another positive note that we drew from this is that 15% of respondents that answered this said they had no dissatisfaction. They're not listed here, but 15% said, nah, it's working great. So this should be encouraging to you, because all other things being equal, some organizations are able to get high realized value, which means they are, as much as possible, automating the data gathering, enrichment, that sort of thing, and they are able to spend more of their time on the strategic items.
Yeah, and I think, just to add, as we talk there, when we do our optimization reviews for our clients with their technology, often we do get to hear the things that Jeff mentioned, team burnout. It took longer, and sometimes what was being implemented was maybe more complex than the clients first thought. So they say, well, we'll take a break and we're going to continue implementing other modules, and that break just ends up extending out. And also, one of the other things that we mentioned is also the design at the start. So sometimes we see clients, when we go and do an optimization review, they've essentially maybe replaced an existing bit of technology with a new bit of technology, but didn't consider how the new technology would actually improve their processes.
Those are good points.
So Jeff, are companies just trying to get more with what they have, or are they also looking at new technologies to address these issues?
The answer is both. Most of our clients can benefit from reconfiguration and some other items to get more out of what you already have. So there are ways to, if budgets are limited, there are certainly ways to get more out of what you already have. In most cases, we don't see existing technologies leveraged to their fullest. There are also instances where there are some new technologies that you can deploy to fill the gaps. There's some exciting new technology on dashboarding. I saw one last week that did a fantastic job of showing liquidity, and robotics processing is another area that come to mind, where it's freeing up people to do more strategic work. And I'll talk a little bit more about these later. And we're actually going to have another study that's the follow-on to this study that will explore all of the new technologies that Treasury are looking at. Next slide, please.
So let's address what you can do to realize, the full extent, the full value of your technology and free up some of your resources so they can work on more strategic activities. Jeff, can you share some of the things that our panel of expert clients suggested were their best practices?
Yes, this is the part of the study that was more interview-based. So we interviewed a large number of organizations that we knew got high utility out of their systems. And the list on the left is a summary of many of the things that the organization said. And so I'll go through them. The power user concept. This is something that most organizations have recognized, that you need people that have almost 1 foot in the IT world and 1 foot in the finance world, and so that they can understand how to use the technology to deliver what finance needs the best. Now, it's important to make sure that you don't pigeonhole these people. I don't want to be Nancy naysayer, but it's a little bit of a negative view that a lot of the power users can never get on to be treasurers. It's also important, several of the people interviewed said it was very important to have a general level of proficiency within their entire team. So, does everybody on the Treasury team understand how the technology is supposed to work, what it's capable of, so you avoid things like people say, no, it can't do that. And that's because they don't understand what it can do. So making sure that as much of your team as possible are comfortable with the technology and are nearing the power user standard, but also to have, maybe it's somebody from IT allocated to Treasury, but have a power user or power users to help you. The second one is interesting. This came from a lot of treasurers. They said you have to have a vision and you also have to have senior level support. And it was said in a lot of different ways. But one person said, as I mentioned earlier, you have to take a hard, objective look in the mirror at what you're supposed to be accomplishing. What is your remit? What are you supposed to, and how does your technology support that? And then another aspect of it is to make sure that everybody understands it and you're constantly selling the vision. And the selling the vision isn't just to the senior team. You're selling up, you're selling across to your peers, and you're also making sure that everybody on the team understand the value that they're bringing to the organization by leveraging technology. So having a vision, and then the next step to that, of course, is having a plan. So having a detailed plan that matches your vision. And I guess this is a hard one lesson. A lot of the people we interviewed said, we figured this one out the hard way. We started trying to figure it out as we went along, and we found out that wasn't working. So we had to take a step back and we had to put in place a plan. And I think Colin mentioned this earlier. It's important to have a plan so that as you're going through and you're making decisions on your implementation or on your reconfiguration or where technology is working and it doesn't work, you can measure it up against the plan. And there are always additional ideas that tend to distract. And having a strong plan and remit helps avoid getting whipsawed by those distractions. The next item is tune-ups. This one is never rest on your laurels. Always strive to add more value by looking at the system and applying system maintenance to it. So those were different ideas that we were given that related, in my mind, to tune-ups. And tune-ups are like your car, right? You don't, if you have the same car for 5 years, you never tune it up or change the oil, the car is going to stop working. So every year, at least every year, maybe even every half year, looking to review how everything's working and adjust it to work better. And this is great because a lot of firms are on solutions now where they just upgrade and there's new functionality. So if you aren't doing tune-ups to take advantage of that new functionality, you're not getting full value. And usually the new functionality is a whole bunch of stuff that your peers have said, this doesn't work right for me, please fix it so I can, free my people up to do more strategic work. So tune-ups are important. And the last two items here to mention are documentation and simplicity. Documentation is something that usually gets thrown off the train as you're trying to get through phase one. it's one of the items that we think is very important, and our panel of experts said was very important in keeping utilization high. As people rotate through positions, which is a positive thing, you want them to understand how to use the technology, what it's capable of, and how it's supposed to be set up. And documentation will take care of that. So if you've skipped documentation, is it as important as some of the others? Maybe not, but it is important. And simplicity is another concept. Simplicity in design is the concept that we were conveyed by the panel of experts. And if it's easy to use, people will use it. So think about how the iPhone is intuitive. It's not. Yes, you can learn to do more complicated things with it, but you can open it up out of the box and figure out how to use it. It's simplicity in design. So avoiding complication is the last item on our expert panel. That is, what they came back and said.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. So can you also provide examples of the areas that we think companies should focus on when considering optimizing their automation?
Yeah, Colin. So I'm gonna summarize these and move through them pretty quick. But it's a 5-part framework. People. Do you have the right team? Does that team have the right training? Are your people in the right jobs? Do they understand how to use the tools at their disposal? And are you correctly staffed to leverage your technology? And this doesn't have to be a negative viewpoint. I think, Colin, you're going to share a few examples where that impacted organizations' abilities to leverage technology. Incentives. Are your KPIs aligned with your use of technology? And are the incentives there as well for people so that highly leveraged technology is incentivized? And the corollary to this, which is, it's a negative, but it should be mentioned, is think about it. Are your team disincented to use technology? Is there some reason that the use of technology is actually detrimental to their corporate well-being? And avoiding disincenting is almost as important as incenting. The next is processes, and we talked about this a little earlier. Are your processes dated or out of sync with your technology? So look at what your objectives are and what your team are doing, and think about, can your processes be adjusted to work better? Not to say that you have to change your processes just to match the technology at hand, but it's also important not to work against it and to update things. Systems, I think, are pretty obvious. Are your systems adequate? Do they need to be upgraded? Or is a reconfiguration necessary? Or do you need to replace or add something new on? I think in a lot of cases when we're talking to folks, we get a lot of raw emotion. I really hate this thing. There's just a lot of negativity. Try and take the emotions out of it and objectively look at what the systems are capable of and try and make an informed decision as to whether you just need to fix it, replace it, or maybe just a little bolt on. And finally, strategy, which ties into the vision I talked about earlier. Is your technology strategy and usage in line with your organizational strategy?
So a little bit
Colin,
short.
You noted that there were probably a few of these that you've experienced in some of your projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of conscious of the last couple of minutes we have left, with a couple more slides to go. But often, I do find where some when we do an optimization review and we're working with a client and we're looking to see where we can kind of help them gain some efficiencies, we do see that often the people, the incentives and the processes all really come together. It's very rare that they're separated in what's causing maybe some issues. And a recent example is they've had new staff, there's no documentation for a transition, one key bit of functionality was maybe not quite understood, and it's really caused a quite enormous ripple effect through their technology that we're unwinding and now enhancing for them.
Excellent. On the next slide.
Yeah. So we also asked some organizations, Jeff, just what areas of Treasury they are looking to enhance with more automation in the near term. So what did you learn from that?
This was a little surprising. You would think that cash management at this point, 30 years in of cash automation, would be in good shape, but it is interesting to see that cash management, straight through processing, and accounting are all areas that companies are still looking to enhance their automation in. And we look at these as tactical efficiencies. They're the foundation to the building. Minimize data collection, enrichment of data, and workflow, so that you've freed people up from that aspect of it. Forecasting and payment controls represent more strategic items. Forecasting so that you're betting, better use of your technology. And people were complaining, a lot of people complained that there wasn't good forecasting technology out there. And so that is something to bear in mind. But it's strategic because organizations are looking to minimize working capital costs or maximize your investment return by minimizing your cash balances. And payment controls are key, and I mentioned this earlier. It's a key defensive strategic item, right? The fraud attempts have become much more aggressive, much more sophisticated, and much more effective. And so organizations have to stay ahead of that, and they're spending a lot of time thinking about payment controls. And the other category at the bottom, the two most prominent there were bank account management and bank fee analysis. Next slide, please.
So thank you everyone so much for joining us on today's coffee break. We hope that you found this valuable and got some good ideas from it. There are ways to achieve effective treasury automation to free your resources so they can focus on strategic value add to the organization. There are just a couple of things I'd like you to know before we go. So first of all, for those of you attending AFP, please see us at booth number 353, as we are giving briefings on the findings there also. If you aren't attending AFP, we do have a formal write-up of the study. Please feel free to contact either myself or Jeff, and we'll be happy to send it to you. Also note there is a second phase to this study that will focus on what new technologies Treasury is looking to utilize to enhance automation. How Treasuries are looking to apply new technologies such as artificial intelligence for fraud prevention, blockchain, dashboarding, and even robotics process automation, or RPA. And then finally, just a note on our next webinar. Shortly after the National AFP conference in Chicago, we'll be doing a webinar on payment controls. It's being hosted in part by the AFP on November the 15th. Please mark it in your calendar and look for the invitations from TSI or the AFP. Thanks again, everyone, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Bye, everyone.